I don't have an intro, I'm just gonna start talking. The new Superman movie is very on the nose about who he is and what he stands for. Almost as if it's speaking directly to you, the viewer, about what you should come to expect from this character. And that transparency is why it really stands out when the film decides to do something unique, such as the drastic change with Superman's home planet of Krypton. They made it to where Superman's parents sent him to Earth in order to enslave it, which is certainly a choice. It's obviously a hard bill to bargain, but I think the blaring problem it brings is that Clark sort of loses his homeworld with this. And the idea of him covering up his birth parents with the Kents by the end of the film kind of feels like he's abandoning a part of himself. You know what this all reminds me of? If I could make a comparison to hone in my point here, the first Thor movie. When Loki discovers he's actually a frost giant, but still values the throne of Asgard, so he tries to destroy his homeworld of Jotunheim in order to show his allegiance, right? Until Thor shows up and thwarts his plan. So let's humor something for a second, and think of this as an analogy for real-world families. Like if Loki was black and Thor was white, you would quickly see how this becomes problematic. And that is exactly how it felt to watch the change to Krypton play out in Superman. The biggest issue is that it has Clark neglect part of who he is in order to center the other half of him. And a story like that for a character that is already supposed to be an allegory for immigrants is an irresponsible narrative to hold. To imply that Clark's homeworld is naturally malicious is the opposite of what we should be doing with him. Especially with Lex Luthor being the obvious xenophobic American that wants nothing more than the removal of Superman. Maybe only I felt this, but having Clark detach himself from Krypton feels like he's letting Lex win in that regard. I think they leaned too much into the human aspect of Superman and accidentally lost the symbolism of coming from dual upbringings for a second. Because while it's great to show Clark's humanity, how it strengthens him and makes him no different from the rest of us, you still need to maintain the original allegory of his situation. I will always love the message that what makes a family is who you build experiences with, but that should never be made from the angle that any one upbringing is better than another. And again, I think the change of making Krypton evil is making it harder to rationalize the importance of this. Because in the context of this universe, yeah, it would be concerning for Clark to defend his Kryptonian heritage, and that's why I called it irresponsible earlier. However, absolutely wild comparison ahead. K-pop demon hunters? Rumi was still able to find truth and reconciliation in herself, even being half a demon, and that's a creature all cultures in the world villainize. So maybe Clark isn't doomed by the narrative just yet. There is still something to his initial inspiration for good doing coming from the first half of his parents' message. He believed that's what it was to be Kryptonian, and going forward with this adaptation, they could still use that to have Clark redefine what the side of him is. Maybe kind of acting as what his parents should have been towards Kara. After all, his powers still come from Krypton, and what makes him Superman is his supernatural abilities in conjunction with his human spirit. But the movie ending with him covering up his birth parents as if they no longer mean anything to him, it's just really unsatisfying to watch. Alright. Y'all are probably gonna hate me for this one, but there is exactly one aspect of Zack Snyder's Superman that I think does better at this, and it's from his cut of Justice League. After Clark is brought back and is preparing to take flight again, he hears both of his fathers encouraging him, reminding him of who he is and what he stands for, even if we don't exactly get to see that most of the time. It's an empowering moment and shows just how important either side of Clark is, how both worlds drive him to be Superman. And I fear David Cornstalk will never get a moment like that now. Which really sucks, because he embodies the hope of the character so perfectly. Stuff like that was actually why I was skeptical of a James Gunn Superman film, because there's an unfortunate pattern with a lot of his comic book movies. The guy can write a good movie. Yeah, but it's always at the expense of something. There's always something missing. Here's how I feel about his Harley Quinn in the Suicide Squad, for example. It's in line with the character, sure. It's good for this story and what she's doing in this movie. Yet, once you start to look at how it plays into the other films, like Birds of Prey, you could kind of see how her character is a little bit behind, and undermines some of what she was already working towards in that film. Ending up in prison again, seemingly abandoning Cassandra, and her whole thing with the president guy is just kind of like another run-in with the Joker. And don't even get me started, the worst crime of all, she's not a girl kisser. Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound right coming from a guy, but you know what I mean. There's actually a line that Harley has in Birds of Prey where she says,
"Call me dumb. I have a PhD, motherfucker."
And that is just 100% not the character that's in the Suicide Squad. I feel like James Gunn writes the character to fit the story, and not the story to fit the character, and that's why I say that there's always something missing with him. So while Superman does a lot of what the character should be doing, achieves a lot of what we expect to see from him, the pattern unfortunately reigns true. His missing trait is his loss of Krypton, and in turn a reduction in his symbolism for dual upbringings and finding hope in all of who you are. Just like Rumi. I really like the hair. I really like the hairstyles of the characters. That has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. Dude, that's such a nice purple, and a nice red, you know? Zoe's fine. She's like the normal one. But it's just like, these are just such satisfying Anyways, for the record, All of that stuff that we talked about just now, that's not part of the Man of Steel comparison. I know that I mentioned that and then just went on about the DCEU, but I was speaking in general. The comparison actually stopped at I Fear David Cornsweat, which is a likely place for it to be. Here's what I feel the change to Krypton was supposed to be about. Because this movie is no stranger to commenting on the conflicts with Israel, their actions, and the US's relation to it, right? So the rift between Clark and Krypton could have been saying that the actions of the homeworld are not to be projected onto the people in other places of the world. Essentially saying the actions of Israel is not an excuse to be anti-Semitic towards Jewish Americans. And considering that Clark was initially created as an allegory for Jewish immigrants, I think that fits. We all know there's a lot of politicians that love to hide behind religion, and some of them sort of use anti-Semitism as a crutch. So with everything that is going on, that just further muddies the water about people's beliefs and where they stand on certain issues. So having this narrative with Superman and learning to separate the individual from the state is a really, really important thing to have right now. I just think that the reason people aren't connecting this is because the character of Superman has become so broad, and making a change this big will obviously affect a lot of what we've come to expect from his story. And the pushback of that could end up overshadowing a lot of the benefits of the change. Very much like with Harley Quinn, as far as this story is concerned, if this is what the change was meant to be, then it's a great change. It's a super important message, and it's the type of theming a film like this should have. However, outside of that, more in line with what we said with Thor and Loki, the broad idea of this change could feel a little confusing, and trying to apply this to anyone else who's watching could instill the wrong idea. And then finally, just looking at Superman not as an allegory at all, but just as a mythos, this change is so far out of left field that I fear will only have negative consequences in the long run. I don't know, I guess it will make Zod more of an opposing threat, but other than that, I really don't see. Like with Kara, why is she even here then? We're never getting Superman horse. Horses are too noble of creatures. Damn, maybe we'll get Bat Cow as a compensation. Cows are getting really popular. Yeah, there's one in Mario Kart. Overrated, if I'm being honest. The penguin's a lot funnier. Yeah, that's about all I got to say. This video is getting way too long anyways. My mom actually has been pushing me to get this out. I would make a joke, but I was a C-section. I guess the last thing to end on is, why don't they tell Bobby? You think he would be able to, like, book them more shows and they could seal the Hun one faster, right?
Yeah, this plane's trash.